Hello everyone and welcome to this session of the Cloud Lunch and Learn Marathon. My name is John Folberth and this will be a walkthrough of Azure Bicep. The intent here is to be able to take anyone to the point where they're able to install, configure, and then deploy a Bicep file. So hopefully this will be a fun session that everyone can get some value out of. Thanks again to the sponsors Microsoft and Redgate for helping put on this event for the community. So some personal background here. I'm a senior DevOps consultant based out of Grand Rapids, Michigan. You can see I got some Azure certifications. There's my personal website information and my Twitter handle. If you want to get a hold of me that way, feel free to reach out. So, jumping into it, and I apologize I won't do that many slides because I know everyone kind of came to see that walkthrough. But it's important to understand what exactly is Bicep. Its intent is to be simplified Azure Resource Manager experience. For those that are familiar with ARM templates, they are JSON. And as people like to tell you, JSON is it's a file type. It's not necessarily a programming language. Bicep, if you are familiar with Terraform, is going to have a little bit of a feel like that, and that's probably a good thing. This is what's been defined as Bicep by the project team. So you can kind of go ahead here, see it's a domain-specific language for deploying Azure Resource declaratively. You can kind of see here that it's going to use certain concepts like modules to help enhance code reusability. But for those that was too long and didn't read, it's just a simplified approach to manage and write infrastructure as code, leveraging the Azure Resource Manager backend. So, quick timeline on Bicep itself. It was originally released in September 2020. They had a lot of functionality. However, there was some manual installations and some manual compilations and deployments were required to actually get things up and running. Then you can see that there was a subsequent release in November 2020. This included a VS Code extension that has been very helpful, and we will go ahead and show how to install and configure that during this walkthrough. It also introduced the concept of modules. For those that are unfamiliar, modules are going to be like a function or a stored procedure, aka something that I can pass a limited set of values or parameters to, and I get a result out of it that I would expect. And then also the concept of target scope was introduced. Target scope refers to how we're going to deploy a resource at a given scope, may that be at the resource level, the resource group level, or even the subscription level. So then there was the big release, version 3.1 in March 2021. This aligned with the latest Azure Ignite session. So that was when it was a major milestone as it marked Bicep being productionalized, and by that I mean that Azure and Microsoft fully support it. You would start to see Bicep now in Microsoft documentation. It included as well as the functionality for loops, which is very important when you're trying to scale out multiple instances of something similarly configured. Now you can use the same template and loop through it. And also the introduction to the support of the existing keyword, which does exist in Terraform as the data piece of it, right? To go ahead and import in a resource. While existing, you can now reference an Azure resource that was already created. So let's move on to what we're all here for. Basically, how to get started with Azure Bicep. Now, what I would like to call out here is whenever I do these things, I try to start with the most vanilla as possible setup. So I have a brand new Azure VM, and the only thing that's been installed on it is VS Code, because I feel like it's important to be able to level set with an audience on how to walk through and get things started. So the first thing I want to do is we're going to go ahead and I'm just going to show you how to search this, is the Azure Bicep GitHub repository. This resource is key for getting started in Bicep. Everything's available out here. They have some tutorials. You can see they got goals, walkthroughs, contributions, or how to contribute if you want to contribute. Frequently asked questions. It is definitely a very valuable resource. I can tell you I've put in some PRs and raised some issues, and the team gets back to you usually within an hour or two, so it's a very responsive group. So that being said, we'll click here on installing tooling, and while that's pulling up too, the one thing that, since it's a new Azure VM that I do not have, is we're going to need the Azure CLI, and the reason for this one is that's how we're going to handle our actual deployments, is using the CLI. So let me go ahead and download this. And while this is downloading too, for this walkthrough to work as desired, you're going to want to have at least the Azure CLI version 2.2 or greater. And that's because, referring back to when I mentioned that when Bicep went live with version 3 and became productionalized, Azure CLI simultaneously, or around the same time, made an upgrade to be able to inherently just take a Bicep file and go ahead and deploy it. Before that, you'd have to compile it as a JSON file and then deploy that separately. So while that's installing, let's go ahead here and go to our extensions and look up that Bicep extension for Visual Studio Code that I referred to earlier. Here it is here. You see it's in preview, but I can say that it's pretty robust, and I can't say that there's anything really holding it back. So we'll go ahead and we'll install that. Let's check our install there, and that's alright. So while waiting for that to install, I'm going to go ahead back here and just kind of pull up another valuable resource for you to know that's out there. There is the Bicep Playground. This is a fun little area to go ahead and see Bicep templates. And what's nice about this is it will give you a side-by-side comparison of what your Bicep code looks like and how it translates and compiles into ARM. So let's wait for this to pull up. Alright, and you can see there's plenty of templates out here, 101, 201, and even 301. So if you're familiar with the Azure Quick Start process, this is fairly similar to that. In fact, some of these have been moved from the Quick Start, or taken from the Quick Start and put into Bicep. So here, just very simple hello world. This would look like a Bicep, and this would look like an ARM. You can already start to see a couple of the differences there. So hopefully that'll make things a little bit easier for you. So there's that install. And next up is the Bicep CLI. I'm on a Windows VM, but you can see there's multiple different ways to install this. We're just going to go ahead here and take the latest Windows installer. And this install should not take as long as the Azure CLI one, so this should be pretty quick. And then while that's finishing up too, whenever I do fresh installs, I like to do a relaunch Visual Studio Code just to pick up everything. Alright, so that is finished. So now let's go and relaunch our code. Alright, and I am going to, whenever I do some of the stuff too, let's go ahead and launch a quick terminal session and confirm that we've actually installed what we think we installed. So let's do AZ version, and this should come back with the CLI version that we installed. And you can see here we've got 2.22, which is the latest one at the time of this recording. And then the next one we're going to do is our Bicep version. And you can see there that we're on 3.255. Again, that's the latest version at this time. So now at this stage, your local environment should be fully configured and set up to work within the Bicep language. So let's get started working. We're going to go ahead here and we're going to create a new folder here for our walkthrough. Yep. And let this load. And we're just going to create a file named .bicep. And go ahead and give this a minute. You can see here that VS Code is launching the Bicep language service. So it just takes a quick minute to pull back. It shouldn't take too much time. So, and while it's waiting there, the thing that you have to do within Bicep, if you're deploying a resource, is you have to go ahead and say, okay, resource, that's what I'm going to be deploying. And you have to give that resource a name, and this name is going to be the name within the Bicep file that is referred to. It won't be the name of the resource. And one of the things I like to do is that whenever I do these type of demos, I always have to use storage accounts, because it doesn't matter if you're a web developer, a data developer, an infrastructure manager, you kind of you are familiar at least with the concept of storage accounts, and they don't take too long to deploy. So let's go ahead here and create this, and next we got to tell the type. You can already see that IntelliSense is pulling back all the available Azure types that it has to it. So we are going to do Microsoft.storage, and let's grab the latest API. Look at that. I can see the latest API rather than have to hunt down through documentation and make sure I'm using the right one. And then from there, we've now got to find the properties for that. And for right now, we're going to hard code. We'll come back to how to do this a little bit better with parameters and variables. So name, this has to be a globally unique name. We're going to do 2021 Cloud Lunch. Why not? So no one else can use that as I deploy this, so you come up with your own. And now location, we had to define where we're going to define this to. I'm in the East US. You can pick whatever region you're closest to or most comfortable with. And then kind. One thing I do like to call out when doing these is Bicep will tell you if the property is required or not, which is pretty nice to have on hand too. And we'll go ahead and do a V2 storage. And then we also have to define the SKU. Oops. Would help if I would spell it right. Alright, and then name. So already you should be getting the feeling that this is very quicker, more streamlined process than traditional ARM deployments. So now that we've got all this, I'm going to go ahead here and launch my terminal. And we're just going to do a bicep build main.bicep. And what this does is through the bicep CLI is it goes ahead and compiles that bicep file and tells us what the ARM is going to look like. And this looks like the beginning of an ARM template. There's nothing in it. Don't feel alarmed. This is expected. I just wanted to call out that, like of any good thing, you gotta save it and then run your build. And now if I go there, there's everything you'd expect, and this looks like an ARM template. So I allude to that we just kind of put the names in there by themselves and set them there, but realistically you'd probably want to do some sort of parameter or variables. So let's go ahead and do parameter location to define where we may want to deploy this to. And I'm going to go ahead and set this to my resource group .location, so to make sure that where I'm deploying this to will be to the same region. And then lastly too, I like to do an app name. So if I have multiple resource types, they will all inherit the same name, and then I would use variables to kind of set what those components would be. So in this case, var, and this would be a good one too, because it can go ahead and show how we would do storage or variable or parameter string concatenation. So account name. And let's go ahead and set this to the SA for storage account abbreviation. And you do $ curly bracket to go ahead and escape. And do app name. And then how do we reference these? So if you are familiar with ARM, you know you have to do square bracket parameters dot parentheses, or it's not clean, right? So here we just go ahead and type in the name and do the same for here. Let's save this, and if you hit in the CLI command the up key, you'll run the previous command. And let's go ahead and check to see what our JSON template looks like. Here you can go ahead and see that, yep, it goes ahead and it fills out all that stuff, but it's a lot easier here in Bicep to do that. So with that being said, now I have an ARM template that we can deploy. So let's go ahead here and deploy this. First, you have to do an AZ login. And this will go ahead and pull up our browser window and ask you to log into Azure. I'm going to go ahead and log into Azure. Alright, awesome. Now, if you do have multiple subscriptions, you may have to do an AZ set subscription and pass in the subscription name. I only have one, so I'm just doing this for full inclusion for those that might be curious as to how to. And sorry about that. It'll be AZ account set subscription. I had a comma on the end of mine there. And there we go, with too many quotes. Alright, and now if I do AZ account show, it will validate what account I'm connected to. So now that I have this Bicep template, we have to go ahead and create a resource group for this. So we do AZ group, create new, and we do RG, lunch, learn, demo, dev for the environment and my region. And then I'm going to pass in a location of East US. We'll go ahead and do that. Okay, resource group's been created. So now we have to deploy the Bicep file and do this. We do AZ deployment group create file main.bicep, and this is where before you would have to give it that main.json after you manually built it, but here we're just giving it the file name main.bicep, and then we have to go ahead and give it the resource group. So this will be our lunch and learn demo dev EUS. Alright, and this should then kick off that deployment process. There we go, it's starting and running, and while it's doing that, I like to go ahead here and show folks too what that deployment actually is going to look like here in the Azure Portal. So here I go to my resource groups, and we've got our Lunch and Learn demo, and here it says it's deploying. I just want to call out here that you can go ahead and see that deployment, and that deployment is here in the form of an ARM template. Hopefully, if I go back here, it still is deploying. But we'll come back to this for the sake of time, but you should then be able to see the storage account be created. In fact, here succeeded, and we can just go into it this way rather than wait for the portal to refresh. You can go ahead and you see that there is our storage account. So the next thing I want to touch on within Bicep, where you drive a lot of power, is going to be, actually before I do that, let me introduce the decompile functionality. So a lot of times people ask, I've got all these ARM templates, how do I actually get to Bicep? How would I go ahead and start using Bicep? So here I took that JSON template that we built out, and I just copied and put it in a new folder. And let's change our directory to the cd decompile. And then here, what I want to show is just go ahead and type in Bicep Decompile main.json. So I'm passing in the JSON file now, not the Bicep file. And this gives you a warning, but what Bicep's going to try to do is just take your JSON file and re-engineer it as a Bicep file. In this case, it's pretty straightforward. We don't have to worry about loss of functionality because we created that JSON file from a Bicep one, so we should be able to convert back pretty easily. Alright, so now that we've got that, I'm just going to go ahead and delete it. We don't need it, but it's something that's powerful and something that I wanted to touch on because sometimes folks are like, I got this heavily investment in these ARM templates. How would I even start to convert into Bicep? At least there's a good starting ground there. So now that we've done that, let's go ahead and talk about how we may want to do a module. So for a module, we got to create a separate file. In this case, I'm going to do storage.bicep, and this will be the module. And we're just going to go ahead here, and I don't need this JSON file. Let me get rid of that. We're going to go here and copy this and put this in the storage account. So, or in the storage.bicep file. We're going to go ahead and remove these because we're not going to take these default parameters anymore. And now we've got a module that in theory should be called upon and take in a location and an app name, and it should then generate a storage account. So let's go back to my main.bicep file. Let's go ahead here and we will keep the main parameters here for now. And that variable will go away because now it's variable is being set within the module. And we go ahead and call module. And we have to give it a name just like we did before in the resource, so storage module. And then we call out where that module is located, again until it's inserted, giving me a list of possible things I want to select. And then from here, now I need to go ahead and define the name, and this will be the name of the deployment. This must be unique to the Bicep file, and I'll show you why it's important to call that out here in a little bit. So there's the name. Next, we already have parameters, so we got to define those. And you were a little lazy, we just kept them the same, but you could have different names here. So there's that, location, and let's save this, and now to do it real fast, let's just do a bicep build main.bicep, and it has now taken that module and it has incorporated that and created an ARM template for us. So that's really fine, it's really swell. Now let's talk about potentially looping and how this module in this instance will work out to really be called twice. So to do that, let's go ahead and change this parameter from a string to an array, and we'll define that this way. And we'll go ahead and remove this for now, create that, and then let's go ahead and do 2021 Cloud Marathon. Call that one. So now we've got an array. So now in our module, we've got to go ahead then and call the loop, or call the array loop through our array. So to do that, we go ahead and do a square bracket and then do for app name. So this will be the reference of the object inside app names. And let me jump down here and close my square bracket. And everything else should be kept the same because we named it the same. So The app names here references the array. This app name is the individual element inside the array. So now if I say that, and this time rather than just doing a build, let's go ahead and kick off a deployment of that bicep file. Oh, what did I forget here? At line 26. What did we do wrong? Oh, so I bit myself on this one. Remember I said that this name needed to be unique? It's telling me that this name appears more than once, so it has to be unique. So this is a really easy one to fix. What if I just go ahead here and do our string concatenation and put in app name into that, save it, and now do our deployment again. Apologies for that, but it's good to call out sometimes some of the mistakes and learn from them, right? Alright, so this is running, and we go back to our Azure Portal. Let's go back to the resource group. Let's refresh this, and I should see, okay, so there's the one module, the lunch storage that's already been out there, and now the marathon one that's kicking off. This is that second one, if you remember, within our loop, and it's going through. It's complete. Let's go to the resource, and there's the resource, so it exists. Awesome. So at this stage, there should be a good overview on Azure Bicep. We've configured the tooling. We've gone ahead and ran and did a simple storage account. Then we went ahead and broke that out to its own module to show how modules might be used. And then we went ahead and did a loop to show how we would loop through modules. So hopefully this gives you some envision where if you're doing certain things like a app service or a web platform, you could have a module for each component of that platform. Maybe a module for the app service, a module for the storage accounts, a module for logging, and that would hopefully drive reusability. So let's jump back here to the presentation and just kind of close this up in conclusion. Bicep does a great job of making infrastructure as code feel more like code. So earlier I touched on that ARM, some of the knocks on ARM is that it's really a file type. It's not really a programming language. Well, with Bicep, it's now a programming language. The other thing too I'll call out here is that anything that's supported in ARM is 100% supported in Bicep from day one in theory. And this I found is mainly true. So what this means is that anytime there's a new update to ARM or anything that's new functionality that's available, Bicep will automatically have that exposed to it and available to it, which is really cool to do. And it's something that Terraform, sometimes it's open. The Terraform, you have the open source community and it has to have an updated module for that new functionality. ARM, you don't have to worry about that. It's ready for you on day one. Again, though, too, this is not designed to replace ARM. It's not designed to replace not designed to replace Terraform. This is just to give you another option that's out there. And the more tools we have, sometimes they have your own pros and cons. So different flavors for different folks. And that's kind of it. So again, thank you for having me here. Feel free to follow on the YouTube channel and the Twitter account there. And again, thank you to all the sponsors that made this possible.